Seraphina Voss had never expected to feel it. The bond. She had heard stories, of course. Every wolf had. The way it arrives like a sound you feel in your chest before your ears catch it. The way the world reorganizes itself around one point, one person, and suddenly everything else becomes background noise. She felt it the moment she walked through the doors of the great hall. 200 wolves filled the space. Kings and their courts, warriors and their seconds, advisors draped in ceremonial furs. Candles burned in iron chandeliers the size of riverboats. The air smelled of pine and old stone, and the particular kind of tension that gathers when power sits in a room and pretends to be polite. Seraphina was not supposed to be here. She was a cartographer's daughter, 23 years old, carrying a leather satchel of unfinished maps that her father had died before he could complete. Someone had to deliver them to the convergence court. There was no one else. She had taken 3 steps into the hall when she felt it. Her eyes moved without her permission. Across the room, through the crowd, past the candlelight and the noise, and 200 people who mattered far more than she did, she found him. Alpha King Caelan Dusk. He was already looking at her. He was tall, built the way old trees are built, not for beauty, but for permanence. Dark hair, gray at the temples, a scar along his jaw that had never quite faded. He wore no crown, only a dark coat with the silver mark of the Ashwood Kingdom at his collar. He looked like a man who had stopped needing things to prove himself a long time ago. For 3 seconds, they stared at each other. The bond hummed between them like a plucked string. Then Caelan Dusk turned away. He turned back to the man beside him and resumed talking. His shoulders did not change. His posture did not change. He picked up his glass and drank from it, and gave no further sign that anything had happened. Seraphina stood in the doorway with her father's maps against her side, and understood, in that same 3-second window, exactly what had just occurred. He felt it. He chose to walk away from it. She crossed the hall to the table assigned to her name, and sat down, and placed her satchel on her lap, and spent the next hour learning how to breathe normally again. The first day passed in ceremony, the second in politics. On the 3rd morning, Seraphina woke early and went to the eastern courtyard to work. She spread her father's maps across a wide stone table and weighed the corners down with river rocks she had collected from the courtyard's fountain. The maps were detailed and beautiful and unfinished. Her father had spent 40 years making them, and the last 2 months of his life had belonged to his illness rather than his work. There were coastlines with no names, mountain ranges that stopped mid-range, river systems that simply ended. Seraphina had been finishing them in every spare hour since she arrived. She was adding a coastal village to the northern edge of a peninsula map when she heard footsteps. She expected a servant. She expected no one, really. The eastern courtyard was unused at this hour, which was exactly why she had chosen it. The man who appeared at the courtyard entrance was not a servant. He was a king. She recognized him from the feast the night before, King Aldrich Crest of the Ironwood Kingdom. He was perhaps 10 years older than Caelan, broader across the shoulders, with a beard going silver, and eyes the warm brown of river clay. He looked like a man who had learned, through difficulty, how to be comfortable in his own body. He walked to the opposite end of her table, looked at the maps spread between them, and picked up her compass without asking. "You draw coastlines like someone who has been to every one of them," he said. Seraphina watched him turn the compass over in his hand. "My father drew them. I'm only finishing what he started." Aldrich set the compass down carefully. He was good. He was exceptional. She paused. "He's gone now. I'm sorry." He said it simply, without ceremony, the way people say things when they actually mean them, rather than when they are performing sympathy. Seraphina noticed this. "You don't have to stand there," she said. "There's a chair." He sat. They worked in a strange, easy quiet for a while, she drawing, he watching without crowding her. After some time he asked about a river system in the eastern map, and she explained the tributaries, and he listened in the way that people rarely listen, which is to say, he did not wait for her to finish speaking so that he could begin. He actually listened. They talked until the courtyard light changed, and the morning became afternoon. He came back the next night. This time he brought 2 cups of tea from the kitchen, set one beside her without comment, and sat down and asked about a mountain range she was still working on. She told him about it. She told him about her father's method of measuring elevation through shadow and angle rather than direct climb. Aldrich asked good questions. The kind of questions that show a person has been thinking about what you said long after you stopped saying it. At some point in the evening he said, quietly and without drama, "I know about the bond between you and Caelan." The courtyard was very still. "The whole convergence knows," Seraphina said. Her voice was steady. She had practiced steadiness in the past 3 days, the way some people practice breathing underwater, desperately and out of necessity. "Are you waiting for him to come to you?" She was quiet for a long time. The candle on the stone table burned down a little. Somewhere in the main hall, musicians were playing something slow and formal. "I've stopped waiting for people to choose me," she said at last. "When they've already shown me they won't." Aldrich looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once, the way men nod when they are filing something away carefully rather than simply agreeing. He left when the candle burned out and did not press her for anything further. The farewell feast was the grandest night of the convergence. It was held on the last evening, when all 5 kingdoms were still gathered, and the agreements had been signed, and the tension of the week had softened into something like relief. The great hall was full of light and noise, and the particular warmth of 200 people who had survived 5 days of politics together. Seraphina had dressed carefully that night, not elaborately. She was not a queen, and owned nothing elaborate, but carefully. A deep green dress borrowed from the convergence wardrobe, her hair pinned back, her father's compass on a chain around her neck, because it was the one thing of his she had kept for herself. She was seated at one of the lower tables when she felt the hall change. It changed the way a room changes when something is about to happen. A shift in attention, a collective intake of breath that isn't quite audible, but is somehow felt. Seraphina looked up from her plate. King Aldrich Crest had risen from his seat at the high table. He waited for the musicians to finish. Then he spoke into the resulting quiet, in a voice designed to be heard across large rooms without any impression of effort. He said that he had come to the convergence as he always came, to honor the bonds between kingdoms, and to uphold the traditions of the 5 courts. He said that he was also leaving with something he had not expected to find. Then he said Seraphina's name. The hall did not go silent exactly. It held its breath, which is different. He asked, formally and before all witnesses, for the right to court Seraphina Voss of the neutral bloodline, with the intent to mark and claim her as Queen of the Ironwood Kingdom. At the lower table, Seraphina's hands were flat against the wood. She could feel her own heartbeat in her fingertips. She did not look toward the high table. She did not look toward Caelan Dusk's seat, though she was aware of its position in the room the way a person is always aware of a fire, not looking directly at it, but knowing precisely where the heat is coming from. She stood. The room watched her cross the floor. Aldrich had come down from the high table to meet her halfway, which she had not expected, and something about that particular gesture, the king coming down, rather than waiting to be approached, settled something in her chest that had been unsteady for 3 days. He offered her his hand. She took it. He asked her, low enough that only she could hear beneath the resumed noise of the hall, "Are you certain?" "I'm certain," she said. The marking ceremony was brief. It was witnessed by the court scribes and the representatives of all 5 kingdoms, and recorded in the convergence ledger, in the permanent ink, that meant it was binding under every law the Wolf Kingdoms had ever agreed to honor. Aldrich was careful. He was, she would think afterward, always careful. When it was done, the hall responded with the formal acknowledgement, raised glasses, the scribe's confirmation, the traditional words spoken by the eldest witness present. And somewhere across the room, Caelan Dusk watched. Seraphina did not look at him. She had made her decision, and looking back was not part of it. But she was aware, in the way that the bond made her permanently aware, of the exact moment his stillness changed quality. There was still stillness, and then there was a different kind, the kind that comes not from calm, but from something being held very tightly in place. His second-in-command said something to him quietly. He did not respond. The hall moved on. Toasts were raised. The musicians started again. Servants moved between tables with fresh wine. The night continued, in the way that nights continue, even when something significant has happened inside them. Seraphina left the Convergence the next morning as Queen of the Ironwood Kingdom. She packed her father's maps last, rolled carefully, wrapped in oilcloth, placed in a travel case that Aldrich's people had provided. The case was stamped with the Ironwood mark now. A small thing. She noticed it anyway. The journey to the Ironwood Kingdom took 4 days by carriage. Aldrich rode alongside for much of it, and on the second evening when the carriages stopped near a river, they sat on the bank and she unrolled one of her father's finished maps, and they located their position on it together. He pointed to a place she had never been. She pointed to a coastline her father had walked 3 times. She did not feel, on those 4 days, that she had made a choice she needed to recover from. She felt, instead, like someone who had finally stopped standing in a doorway and had walked through it, and found the floor solid on the other side. This did not mean the bond was gone. It was not gone. It would not go. A fated bond does not dissolve because it is rejected or redirected. It lives in the body the way old injuries do, not always painful, but present. On certain mornings, at certain angles of light, she would feel the pull of it and know exactly what direction to point if she wanted to follow it. She chose, on those mornings, to look at the maps instead. Aldrich never pretended the bond did not exist. This was, she came to understand, the most respectful thing he could have done. He did not compete with something that had no shape to compete with. He did not demand that she deny it, or diminish it, or perform a happiness she had not yet arrived at. He simply loved her in the space beside it. He had 2 daughters from his first marriage, both grown, both initially uncertain about their father choosing a young mate who arrived carrying dead cartographer's maps, and a bond that technically belonged to someone else. Seraphina did not try to win them quickly. She moved through the Ironwood court at her own pace, learned its structures, found its rhythms. She was not a warrior queen. She was not built for ceremony. What she was, she discovered, was deeply good at understanding geography, which, when applied to people and courts and political systems, is simply another way of saying she was good at knowing where things fit. The daughters came around, eventually, in the way that people come around when they see someone consistently being who they said they were. 6 years later, Seraphina was writing a letter to her youngest stepdaughter, who had recently felt her own bond and was frightened by it. She was writing to explain what she knew about bonds and choice and the difference between them. She wrote several drafts. She crossed out most of what she wrote because it was either too much or not enough. In the end, she kept one line about the man who had looked across the hall and turned away. There was a man who was meant for me, and he looked at me across a crowded room and decided I was not worth the risk. He was not a bad man, he was a frightened one. And I have spent enough of my life being gentle toward frightened people to know that it costs you something you don't always get back. What I learned from him is this: being chosen in theory is nothing. Being chosen in the room, on the night, in front of everyone, that is the only choice that counts. Everything else is just a feeling someone let grow in the dark. She sealed the letter and gave it to the messenger. Then she went back to her table, where a new map was waiting. A territory her father had never reached. No one had drawn it yet. She picked up her pen. She began.